Hello and welcome to Kindred Spirits Book Club, the podcast where two grown-ass ladies geek out about Anne of Green Gables. I'm Kelly Gerner, and I'm joined by my co-host, Reagan Duffy. Hey, Reagan.
Hello, Kelly. Hello, kindred spirits.
Today's episode is about a topic that we've been thinking about for a long time, actually. We are talking about Ella Montgomery's Unlikable Girls. One of the things that makes Maud's work so intriguing is her inclination to include depictions of girls and young women in her books who are not strictly likable, but who also aren't necessarily villains. In a time period when, even more so than now, a girl's charm and appeal were often her primary social currency, Maud was doing something different in writing stories about girls who were challenging and hard to get along with, but still authentic and sympathetic characters. Our cornerstone unlikable girls from this season are Felicity King from The Story Girl and The Golden Road, and Mary Vance from Rainbow Valley. But we'll also discuss more generally some of the other disagreeable girls from the Montgomery verse, like Avonlea's own Josie Pye, and Jen Pringle and Catherine Brooke from Anne of Windy Poplars, and Jenny Penny and Delilah Green from Anne of Ingleside. Okay, but first, you guys, Reagan just returned from an absolute dream trip to London and Paris. You have to tell us all about it, Reagan.
Oh my gosh. Well, I will try not to take up too much time because we really tried to cram as much possible into this vacation and we had the best time. So we took my daughter to London and Paris. This was kind of the first big out of country trip where she's really able to participate. And I think it's going to be a major memory for her going forward. I hope so.
I'm sure it will be.
So we went to London first. We did so much in London. We walked all over London. We saw 3 shows on the West End. We hit up most of the major landmarks. We did like Big Ben, the British Museum. We climbed all the way up to the top of St. Paul's Cathedral for a 360-degree view of the city. That was a hike.
Yep.
Alice absolutely loved it. We had afternoon tea in the quaintest little place. And London is so easy to get around. We took the tube or the double-decker bus everywhere. You always have to ride on the top, of course.
Yep.
And that was a great experience for my Angelino kid who never gets to use public transportation. So she really enjoyed that. And then we took the Channel to Paris and we had several days there at the cutest hotel. They had eclairs and crepes and other treats available at all hours of the day.
Oh, the best.
And we packed a ton into Paris too. We did the Eiffel Tower and we did a Seine boat cruise. We did the Louvre. We could only get tickets for the Louvre going in at like 5:30 and it closed at 8:30, but it was good because it forced us to stay focused and we didn't feel like we had to try and see everything. There's obviously no way that you could.
Yeah.
But we knew we didn't even have to try.
Well, also, I think there's something to be said. I think this is maybe even like a little bit of a travel hack in going to a museum in the evening.
Yes.
Right? Not only if it's a large museum does it kind of focus your visit, but also like people who've been there all day are leaving.
Yeah.
Their feet hurt, they saw what they needed to see, they're tired and cranky and ready for dinner.
Yeah, it was crowded when we first went in, but then like the last hour and a half that we were there, it was starting to empty out and it was much easier to move around and see everything. We went to various gardens like the Tuileries. We walked around the Latin Quarter. We saw the outside of Notre Dame, but the line was bananas to go in. Instead of doing Notre Dame inside, we went to Sacré-Cœur at Montmartre, and we also hiked to the top of that cathedral, which is the highest point in Paris. So we had a huge, amazing view of the whole city. And we did eat lots of crepes and croissants. And we went to Angelina for the fancy, fancy hot chocolate.
Oh, the best. Did Alice love it?
She did. It's so rich, but we got some amazing raspberry patisserie macaron concoction thing that was one of the most amazing things I've ever eaten. It was so good.
Wonderful.
Of course, we left wishing we had more time in both cities, but that's kind of good. She's excited to go back and travel again and go back to those cities in the future. I would love to go back to those cities in the future. It was overall a fantastic trip.
Amazing. Yay. Well, I'm so excited for you guys.
Thank you. And now we are back to reality.
I know. And before we fully dive back into the episode, Kindred Spirits, I want to invite you to follow us on social media. And when I say social media, I really just mean follow us on Instagram. Because until Reagan and I can afford a KSBC intern, I think that our social media presence is just going to be the platform that we are already using, which is that
Yes.
one.
Exactly.
So go ahead and give us a follow on Instagram at kindredspirits.bookclub, and then you will get all kinds of updates about all the things we're doing. So we have special guests and giveaways and all sorts of things like that happening. Plus, we love sharing fun bookish memes and beautiful photos of our Ella Montgomery libraries. So Instagram is the best place to connect with us. You can send us a DM. We absolutely love hearing from our listeners. Also, if you are enjoying the podcast, please take a moment to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, which helps the algorithm promote our show and lets more kindred spirits find us. It's all about bringing more friends into the fold.
For sure. All right, well, let's get into our episode. And our kindred spirit of the episode is Felicity King. Felicity King is the patron saint of unlikable girls. She is quick to take offense, quicker to boss others around. She's extremely aware of her good looks and her homemaking talents and desperate to be right all the time. But she's also practical and hardworking, and underneath her oppositional nature, she's loyal and loving. Most importantly for the plot, Felicity provides the friction the kids of the Golden Road need. They need her to bounce off of. Our quote of the episode is just going to set up a little bit of where our girl Felicity is coming from when we start the book. And it comes from Sarah Stanley, the story girl, and she and Bev are preparing to suggest their idea to produce a magazine. Bev starts. He says, "It was really the story girl's idea and none of mine, but she had insisted that I should make the suggestion as coming wholly from myself. If you don't, Felicity won't agree to it. You know yourself, Bev, how contrary she's been lately over anything I mention. And if she goes against it, Peter will too, the ninny. It won't be any fun if we aren't all in it."
The kids have to like do this like reverse psychology to get Felicity's line because she's just so contradictory in this moment.
And so predictably contradictory, right?
Right. Well, today's story club is all about Felicity and the other unlikable girls in Ella Montgomery's work. We've been excited to talk about this for a while, and after rereading The Story Girl and The Golden Road, we knew this was the right time to finally discuss it, because Felicity King is the quintessential unlikable girl in Maud's world. But let's start by defining what we mean by unlikable girl, because the fact is we actually do like most of these girls, at least in some way. So it's not really our subjective standard of likability, but rather a more objective one, right? Society's standard of likability for a girl or a young woman. And particularly, we're judging this by the time period when Maud was writing and the earlier time period in which she set many of the books. So we're really thinking this like late Victorian period. And at this time, a woman's behavior and demeanor was like very strictly circumscribed to a set of ideals that didn't really leave a lot of room for individuality. I mean, really almost no room for individuality. Women were seen as physically weaker, but morally superior to men. And so they were expected to uphold morality in the social and domestic space. Like that was like their primary thing. Being moral, being pure, being virtuous, right? Victorian women were also really limited in their access to education and to work. And girls were told from a very young age that their primary objective in life was to marry and have children. But remember, they also have to be very virtuous. So they were also told that they couldn't pursue a husband. So they had to be lovely, ladylike, demure, and above all passive, and sit at home and let suitors come to them. They were really trapped in this sort of very narrow, sweet, passive, well-mannered, virtuous mold. And then it's quite an interesting contrast that once married, a good Victorian woman was expected to be respectable, virtuous, pious, but also diligent and hardworking. Because once a husband and eventually children have come to her, she can't sit around and be passive anymore. So a married Victorian woman was busy and capable, and she was an upright member of the community whose strength and authority came from her morality. And those are the adult women that we see in the Montgomery verse, right? When we think of Marilla Cuthbert, when we think of Mrs. Rachel, when we think of Miss Cornelia, these are all these staunch, hardworking, morally superior women. So it's within this tension that we find so many of Montgomery's unlikable girls. That tension between being a sweet, passive girl, waiting to be graced by marriage and motherhood, and the reality of being an industrious, virtuous, capable adult woman. So the expectation for young girls may have been submissive and gentle behavior, but then the reality that faced them later on is that once they were adults, they would be expected to manage households, children, farms, schools, churches, and really entire towns.
And that doesn't really leave a lot of room for girls to figure out who they are in between. And we know the process of figuring out who you are is one of missteps, of back and forth, of making mistakes and then going forward again. So in Montgomery's work, we have our likable girls who don't strictly fit that ideal Victorian mold. Anne, obviously, with her temper and dreaminess and vanity. Faith Meredith, impulsive and heedless of public opinion. And of course, the story girl, charismatic, clever, unconventional. And we have our likable girls who do fit more of that classic Victorian girlhood ideal. Una Meredith, Cicely King, even Diana Barry. Girls who are more conventional, particularly in relation to Victorian morals.
And I would even add to this and say that these are all girls who still embody sort of a gentility that would have been seen as essential to Victorians, right? Even Faith, who truly is too bold for the Victorian taste, she does have sort of like a sweet tendency that overcomes some of her other faults.
Well, I think if we are talking about this, Faith, some people do find her beyond the pale. Like, think of Mrs.
Yeah.
Alice Davis. Somebody like Anne likes Faith's boldness, even if she thinks it's a little unhinged. But Faith toes the line. I think as readers, we really like her, partly because we're very much in her viewpoint. And also
And
from,
we know how hard she's trying.
yes. Yes, exactly. We know all the emotional piece, and Faith is never mean.
No. No. Heedless, impulsive, but she doesn't have the cruel streak running through her that some of these other girls we're going to talk about today definitely do.
For sure.
And of course, you mentioned Diana Barry. I almost think she's like the ideal, right?
Right.
Beautiful, gentle, ladylike, passive.
But also very social, right? A good representative of her social class.
She's not shy like Una and Cecily are, right? She is more out in the world than they are, but all the better to transition to adulthood and becoming like a community leader, right? And I think one of the reasons Diana is portrayed as like so perfect, such a quintessential Victorian girl, is because she's supposed to be the contrast to Anne, right? And she's supposed to kind of highlight some of Anne's flaws.
So let's talk about the unlikable girls. They aren't always even antagonists, really, but they do create friction wherever they go. Felicity King, certainly, although she's beautiful and highly capable in the home, she's almost aggressively oppositional with the other kids and so convinced of her own superiority that she takes the story girl's unconventionality as a personal threat. We also have Mary Vance. Mary is jealous, blunt, and itching to be the authority in all situations. Josie Pye is more of a stereotypical mean girl, from the reader's perspective anyway. She seems snotty and antagonistic towards Anne. Let's take a little minute and talk about Felicity and Josie Pye. So Josie Pye was the original. Felicity is coming later in Maud's work, but we get to know her a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
While Felicity isn't particularly likable, she's not an antagonist the way that Josie Pye is, not in any real sense of the word. She's one of our little gang of kids, and while we might prefer to hang out with the story girl rather than Felicity, Felicity's quirks are accepted as par for the course, and generally speaking, they often don't take her too personally for too long. They figure out ways to just get around her.
Yeah.
They get mad at each other, but get over it. There's no real threat to their relationships. Because Felicity is one of the group, even when the others are irritated by her, she's still in, and we get a chance to understand her better. We get a chance to see her in a whole variety of situations. We can see that sometimes she says things she doesn't really mean. And when the moment is crucial, she's a team player. We glimpse her insecurity running through her snarkiness. And we care when we start to see her thaw out towards Peter. So while she's not strictly likable, we care about her. We want good things for Felicity.
Yeah, very much so.
But Josie Pye, she's set up from the beginning as unlikable, making snarky comments about Anne and acting superior. But we only see her from Anne's perspective. We never really get to know her for herself. I mean, what's going on in the Pye family that Josie turned out this way? Why is she consistently mean? From Josie's perspective, what's going on here? In her story, when she's the main character, is Anne the antagonist?
I love all those questions, Reagan. And I really think that gets down to the magic of what Maud is doing with her unlikable girls, because we can almost always understand where they are coming from. As you point out, Felicity is such a perfect example. She's this girl who has like a near adult competence in the domestic realm and thus believes that she should have like greater power and authority than her siblings and cousins will ever accord to her. And so Felicity's antagonism seems to stem from that frustration. tension. But for Josie, we just don't have as much textual support to explain her Anne-focused antagonism. Maud really falls into that old trope of like, oh, well, pies will be pies when it comes to Josie. But I think that we may be able to make a case that Josie does perhaps feel wronged by Anne, who Josie would have seen to be an unknown and an upstart. I mean, surely the Pye family would have been saying that to Josie. Oh, who is this girl? No one knows who her people are. Meanwhile, Josie, of course, is from an established Avonlea family. And then when Anne rises to a level of social popularity in school and in the town and rises to a level of scholastic achievement that maybe Josie felt was her due, Josie then takes that out on Anne just, by dint of her sheer unpleasantness.
Well, it occurs to me that one of the primary ways all of these girls are unlikable has to do with that feeling of being superior and then acting superior, particularly with the other kids. Let's take a little look, right? So here's something that Felicity says when all of the other kids are making resolutions. We hear her say this: "I can't think of any resolutions I want to make," said Felicity, who's perfectly satisfied with herself.
Of course she is.
She also has lots to say about all the resolutions the other kids should be making.
She has plenty of ideas for them. Yes.
She's got a list. Mary Vance, she begins a lecture to the Meredith kids about some of their misbehaviors with, "I wouldn't have done such a thing for the world, and I weren't brought up in the manse, weren't brought up anywhere, just come up."
I love that Mary is like, I basically was raised by wolves, and even I wouldn't do that.
Exactly. We've got Jenny Penny in Anne of Ingleside, and she says when she's trying to convince Di to come home with her, "Putting on airs because you have a father and a mother and I have none," said Jenny disdainfully. "Why, my father has wings and always wears a golden crown, but I don't go about with my head in the air on that account, do I? Now, Di, I don't want to quarrel with you, but I hate to hear anyone bragging about their folks. It's not etiquette."
Okay, Jenny.
Catherine Brooke in Windy Poplars deliberately makes herself unlikable. Anne writes to Gilbert about Catherine: "Every time I pass her on the stairs, I feel that she is thinking horrid things about me. Every time I speak to her, she makes me feel I've said the wrong thing."
Oh, yeah. Catherine. And I think that's right. All of these girls do want to hold themselves not just apart from their peers, but above their peers. So in some cases, maybe they do have superior talents or abilities, right? Felicity is a better cook, and Mary Vance is a better housekeeper than the other children. But it's the way they sort of lord it over their friends that causes this tension, acting like they know best or they are equally as powerful as the adults in the house. And the kids aren't buying it. They know that that's not the case. Like, you're just one of us. I think that the other two examples of superior girls, Jenny Penny and Catherine Brooke, are also really interesting here because they seem like the same kind of superiority, but shown from different levels of development, if that makes sense. Like with Jenny Penny and young Di, it's just silly to see a very young child telling her equally young friend what is right and wrong in matters of etiquette, right? It's played for comedy. Like, okay, these two 8-year-old girls, come on.
Like, really, what do you know?
Okay, it's not etiquette, are you sure? But then you can see how that sort of like know-it-all or I know better attitude becomes ingrained over time in Catherine Brooke, right? Who's so caustic and who always manages to make Anne feel like she said the wrong thing. And then to go back to your earlier question about where Josie's antagonism comes from, I think her sense of superiority, because she surely has one, I think her sense of superiority comes from simply being a Pye, right? Like one of the great families of Avonlea. And in that way, she reminds me of another one of our unlikable girls, Jen Pringle from Anne of Windy Poplars. And, that was a girl who had so much support from such a powerful family that she always expected things to kind of play out the way she wanted them to and never thought she was going to be held accountable. And Josie seems to have a lot of that energy as well.
Right, for sure. So here's something interesting about Josie Pye. When we were writing this episode and I was going back and looking for quotes, one of the things I realized about Josie, she is not on the page very much herself in the book. We get references to the Pyes being very Pye-like from Diana early on. Anne spots Josie cheating during a spelling quiz very early in her time at the Avonlea school. And there are references that Anne makes to Josie being unpleasant, but we don't really see or hear it directly. So I was thinking that most of us of a certain generation really have Josie pictured from the Kevin Sullivan adaptation, right? In that adaptation, Josie is a much bigger character, and she's very obviously being a mean girl. She's not just scornful or superior, she's outright insulting to Anne frequently, and she openly competes with Anne for Gilbert's attention. And that's not particularly in the book. Maybe implied, but it's not really on the page at all.
Yeah, that is such a great point, Reagan. The Josie of the books isn't Anne's like romantic rival at all, for one thing, which now that I think about it, like how gross is it that she was adapted that way for the miniseries, right? Like the only way she could be a true antagonist to Anne is if they were both competing for Gilbert. Come on.
Right? Like, come on, of what we know about Gilbert, you know he was never actually interested in Josie, right?
Of course not. Of course not. And also, like, can't a girl just be sort of unpleasant and snarky without it being about a boy?
Right. Snarkiness is its own reward.
It is. But, Josie is mostly just kind of like snobbish to Anne in the book. And it's not nice, but it's not the biggest deal. I almost think that Josie sort of looms larger in Anne's imagination than she actually does on the page. And then by the end of Anne of Green Gables, Anne and Josie are at Queen's together, and although they certainly are not friends, they, seem to have reached a détente, right? They understand each other.
So as I was looking, one of the few direct moments with Josie that we see in Anne of Green Gables is during Diana's party when they all are daring each other to do silly things.
Of course.
This quote is coming right off the back of, I believe, Jane failing one of Josie's dares. Quote, Josie's triumph being rather more pronounced than good taste permitted, Anne Shirley dared her to walk along the top of the board fence which bounded the garden to the east. But Josie Pye, if deficient in some qualities that make for popularity, had at least a natural and inborn gift duly cultivated for walking board fences. Josie walked the berry fence with an airy unconcern, which seemed to imply that a little thing like that wasn't worth a dare. Josie descended from her perch, flushed with victory, and darted a defiant glance at Anne. This then leads Anne to boast that it's not actually all that impressive to walk a fence because she knew someone who could walk a ridgepole. And thus, gauntlet thrown, Josie dares Anne to walk the ridgepole. So, yeah, Josie's a little obnoxious, but really it's Anne's own pride that's the problem here. And later, when the Queen's class is organized, Anne reports, quote, Josie Pye said she is just going to college for education's sake because she won't have to earn her living. She says, of course, it's different with orphans who are living on charity. They have to hustle. So it's definitely implied that Josie is full of herself and speaks in the kind of snarky manner that reminds us of Felicity's kind of zingers.
Yeah.
If we take a look at Josie here, we also see that this dare situation between Josie and Anne is awfully similar to Felicity and Dan in the bad berries incident, right?
Oh, yeah.
Felicity told him he shouldn't eat the berries. He wasn't intending to eat the berries anyway. But as soon as Felicity told him he shouldn't eat them, Dan couldn't resist the taunt and took the bait.
Mm-hmm.
So of all the girls here, I kind of think Felicity and Josie share the most DNA, but because we only really see Josie through Anne's eyes, she's not a fully fleshed out character in the books the way that we really get to know Felicity.
Right.
And if we interpret Josie as being more similar in personality to Felicity, maybe that makes her a little more sympathetic. Because even though Felicity is kind of a pill throughout both books, but especially The Golden Road, we kind of get to understand a little bit more about why that is.
And we see enough of her that we see her good points and her bad points.
Right.
Josie, we just only ever see being obnoxious.
Right.
So Felicity is used to being admired for her beauty and her cleverness in the kitchen. But now she's at an age where intelligence, creativity, and kindness are being valued by the kids in her orbit. So she can bully Dan and Cecily with her strong personality and with the sort of implicit backing of Aunt Janet, who trusts Felicity with household matters, but she can't do that as effectively to the story girl or to Bev or Felix. The authority she has in housekeeping and cooking just isn't translating into overall authority. Instead, Sarah Stanley and Bev are clearly the leaders of their little group, and Cecily's inherent gentleness and goodness earns her a lot of respect as well from the group. Now, Peter, of course, adores Felicity and supports her, but she is noticing that the other girls have their own admirers, and so she's not used to sharing that attention. Cecily has two boys with crushes on her, and Bev kind of seems to have a thing for the story girl. So in the Golden Road, you're really seeing for the first time, Felicity is maybe starting to feel some of that insecurity. And we know that for some folks, insecurity must be immediately covered up with aggressively insisting that one is superior and knows all, and that the other folks are lacking. And that is exactly where Felicity goes.
It is textbook.
Felicity is very much on the offensive throughout the Golden Road. So much so that, like, right from the beginning of the book, as we talked about in our quote of the episode, Bev and Sarah Stanley have to carefully plot how to bring up the magazine idea so that way they can get Felicity's buy-in. Because they know that if it's the story girl's idea, Felicity will just reflexively push back, even if it's to her own detriment. Not only does Bev have to bring it up as his idea, the story girl also then acts like it's a dumb idea. So that way Felicity will champion it to get back at the story girl, and then the story girl can pretend to be persuaded by the other kids to Felicity's side. They do all of this just to make Felicity feels like she won. It's so absurd. And then we kind of see the same thing throughout the resolution setting scene, right? Felicity can't help but immediately snark on pretty much everything everyone else says. Whether she's helpfully reminding Dan that he should resolve not to eat any more berries, or mentioning that she never minds being interrupted when the story girl makes that resolution for herself. But in any case, Bev notes correctly that Felicity is unbearable that evening.
Felicity's two main targets are Dan and Sarah Stanley, the story girl. With Dan, I think there is something that is baked into their sibling relationship. She just cannot resist taunting Dan at all, every chance she gets. And Dan initially rises to the bait every time. And there's something very, very sibling-ish in this. It cracks me up every time I see siblings do this to each other, as I am sure I did with my sister.
Please, I still sometimes do this to my brothers. There's something about all being together that immediately takes us all back to being like 12 years old.
Yeah, because with anyone else, with friends or with adults or other people in the community, you know how to take turns. You can see their side of the
Of
story
course.
somewhat. You can hold yourself back from arguing just for argument's sake. But there's something about siblings where they just bring out each other's absolutely worst tendencies. Everything about them bothers you. They can't say anything without you absolutely needing to disagree with them.
I almost think that with Dan and Felicity, they will be like this their whole lives.
Yes.
Right? They will be living next door to each other on adjoining farms in Carlisle or whatever, and every time they see each other, they're just going to bicker. Just for the
Yep.
rest of their lives. It's just their dynamic.
Now, Dan really turns the table on Felicity in the wake of his resolution not to fight with her so much. He lands on the technique of cheerfully agreeing with her while calling her a creative assortment of over-the-top pet names.
It's so great.
It's
This is one of the
great.
funniest running gags in this book.
Absolutely drives Felicity bonkers that he is not engaging with her in that same combative fashion where she can feel superior about making him lose his temper, because that's what it was. He would say something, Felicity would comment on it snarkily, and then he'd blow up at her, and she could be like, I never lose my temper.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, when Dan's like, do you really think so, darling of my heart? Like, what can she do with that?
Nothing. Nothing.
Nothing.
He totally took all her power away.
It is genius on Dan's part, and it neatly flips that power dynamic right on its head. Now, Felicity can push around a little bit, partly because of Felicity's household competence, and Cecily is most likely engaging in those same activities with her, and partly because Cecily rarely pushes back, so it loses its novelty quickly for Felicity. She doesn't seem nearly as driven to constantly correct Cecily.
Yeah, there's no satisfaction for Felicity in sort of punching down to her sister that way.
Right. But the story girl, that's a whole other ball of wax for Felicity, though. Sarah Stanley and Felicity have always clashed a bit. In the first book, there were quite a few times where one or the other of them had stopped speaking to the other girl. But as we get into the Golden Road, we see that Sarah Stanley's growing maturity starts meaning that she takes Felicity's bait less and less. One thing Felicity hates is being ignored, and I imagine that she starts intuiting the story girl's internal eye rolls at her, which probably prompts even more insecurity. Actually, the less the story girl takes the bait, the more she kind of just lets it roll off her back, the more insecure Felicity probably feels, which is contributing to her kind of increasing oppositional nature these days.
Oh, yeah, that's a really interesting way to think about it, right? Like Felicity will say something maybe immature and Sarah just doesn't respond to it at all. And Felicity's like, oh, a year ago you would have rolled your eyes or told me I was dumb and now you're not, but I know you're thinking it.
Right. Right. It's almost worse. Or she's not thinking of Felicity at all, which is worse.
Yes, she's not thinking of Felicity at all.
She just moved on right past it. Because in the first book, in The Story Girl, we see the Story Girl snipe at Felicity a little bit more. There's a little bit more back and forth happening. The Story Girl is very much a conundrum to Felicity. They are in direct opposition in a lot of ways. Felicity is conventionally beautiful and a champion housekeeper, textbook Victorian girlhood ideal. Sarah Stanley is admittedly not beautiful. She's striking, but she's not beautiful. Sarah Stanley doesn't have a traditional family. She's hopeless, more than hopeless, at household tasks and cooking, but she's captivating and intelligent and creative. Her talent is pure and obvious, so much so that not only are the other kids drawn to her, but all of the adults around her notice this. Everyone from her developing a special relationship with Alice Reed or the awkward man, the way that Aunt Olivia starts treating Sarah Stanley more and more with maturity rather than treating her like a little girl. Felicity feels like she should be getting all of the praise, especially with all of her prowess in the kitchen. And even though she herself is captivated by the Story Girl's storytelling, she's deeply jealous and can't put her finger on why exactly. It seems like that's why she loves pointing out the impropriety of the people in Sarah's stories. It's a proxy for her rivalry with the Story Girl.
Right. Even though she's fully enjoying these stories, she always has to point out that like, oh, so and so is a hussy or something like
Right, right. She shouldn't have done that. How I can't believe she ran away, right?
Story Girl is like, it is a story. Calm down, please.
Right.
I wonder with these two, I was kind of speculating that Felicity and Dan sort of remain antagonistic throughout their adulthoods, but I wonder if that's also true for the Story Girl and Felicity. I kind of think not.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
think that once they're adults and they realize that they're not competing on the same sort of ground, I think it winds up okay. Sarah has a career. I'm assuming Sarah has some kind of, career as an actor or something like this, or some sort of a writer or storyteller. And Felicity takes her place as a community leader and a minister's wife. It's like they both kind of like end up on the paths they're supposed to go on. And once they're not in direct conflict that
Yeah.
way, I bet they can be friends as adults.
Yes, they may never truly understand each other. I don't think they do, but I think they can appreciate each other and let that love between them shine a little bit more because they're not in direct competition. Felicity is not, she loves being pretty and having people appreciate her prettiness, but she's not bucking for, international acclaim.
Acclaim. Right. Yeah, she doesn't want to be an international woman of mystery. Sarah
Right.
Stanley, on the other hand, I think very much does.
Exactly. Sarah
Felicity
Stanley
wants,
was never going to be interested in being, I guess, PTA head is not really the thing, but the Sunday school teacher
right.
and the winner of the blue ribbon pies every summer. But that Felicity would. Felicity very much wants to be that person.
I can see them writing letters to each other as adults.
Yes, for sure.
And Sarah saying, "Oh, I was on the stage in New York," and Felicity saying, "I won the blue ribbon pie," and they're both very happy with their choices.
They're like, good for you. What does Amy Poehler say? Good for you, not
Good
for
for
me.
you. Yep. Our other unlikable girl is Mary Vance from Rainbow Valley. She is the bossy, brash little orphan who couch surfs at the manse right under the nose of the oblivious minister. She also manages to whip the house into shape, and she joins the little crew of friends in Rainbow Valley. She joins up with the Blythe children and the Meredith children as part of their merry band. Mary is an interesting little character, and unlikable in some of the same ways that Felicity is, right? She's very competent in matters of housekeeping, and she uses that expertise to dominate the other children, particularly the Manse girls. But interestingly, the Blythe girls are kind of able to brush off Mary's know-it-all tendencies, right? There's this interesting scene where Walter is telling stories in Rainbow Valley, and Mary calls them interesting lies, and Di Blythe is just like, no, what are you talking about? She just brushes her right off. But then Faith and Una Meredith, they are very aware of the ways they're deficient in matters of housekeeping. So they kind of trust Mary more and they take her comments to heart, especially, crucially for the plot, Mary's sort of ominous negative opinions about stepmothers.
Right. The Meredith girls are kind of interesting in the sense that while they've been allowed to run wild, they're much more in kind of a bubble than either Mary Vance, who is very aware of the way the world works and kind of the harsh way the world works. And you would think that the Blythe girls would be the ones that are in the bubble, but because their family has been participating in conventionally social activities, they are not as judgmental as Mary, but they are very aware of the way the world works as well. It's interesting, the Meredith kids, for all of their neglect, are not street smart.
No, yeah, they've been very sheltered by their father and at the manse. They seem to not have like a grasp on the wider world in the same way that the other kids do.
Right. And Mary Vance is kind of, she's the one who is like, I better tell these kids what's going on.
She's like filling a vacuum of knowledge for them in a lot of ways, and often incorrectly.
Right. You never want to get your best. This is, by the way, my PSA for parents to teach your children about sex and bodies before their peers do. Because do you want a Mary Vance giving your children the birds and the bees talk?
Absolutely not. Horrifying to think. But we can't really talk about Mary as an unlikable girl without talking about her losing her temper at Rilla Blythe and chasing her with the dead codfish.
Poor baby.
So this is the scene where Rilla comes to deliver strawberries to the minister, and she's all starched and prim and pretty with an embroidered pinafore and a ribbon sash, and there's just something about her that sets Mary off. So Mary grabs this giant dried codfish off the line, and she chases Rilla away with it, saying that it served Rilla right for coming over with her heirs. So we see that Mary does have this mean streak in her, and that is very much triggered by her own feelings of insecurity. And it makes a lot of sense that Mary wields her sort of domestic capabilities like a knife, or wields it like a dried codfish, if you will, to prove herself worthy to the people in her world, right? As an orphan who's been mistreated and abandoned, she knows that one way she will be able to find a home and some measure of security is just by being a hard worker and being good at housework. So that's what she does. She's incredibly hardworking and resourceful at the manse, but she also feels like she has to extra prove her competence by boasting to the other Rainbow Valley kids.
Right. Nobody's ever championed Mary, so she is definitely of the belief that she should champion herself.
Oh, yeah.
In Mary's own words, she, quote, never struck anything yet I couldn't do if I put my mind to it, she declared. Mary seldom lost the chance of tooting her own horn. She taught them how to make blow bags out of the thick leaves of the live forever that flourished in the old Bailey garden. She initiated them into the toothsome quality of the sours that grew in the niches of the graveyard dike. And she could make the most wonderful shadow pictures on the wall with her long, flexible fingers. And when they all went picking gum in Rainbow Valley, Mary always got the biggest chew and bragged about it. There were times when they hated her and times when they loved her, but at all times they found her interesting. So they submitted quite meekly to her bossing, and by the end of the fortnight had come to feel that she must always have been with them.
And when she's not bragging about her many skills to the other kids, Mary is hard at work. After she's adopted or taken in by Miss Cornelia, Mary feels that she must earn her place by working. Miss Cornelia tells Anne and Susan, quote, as for work, I never saw anything like her. She eats it up. Mrs. Wiley may have been cruel to her, but folks needn't say she made Mary work. Mary's a born worker.
Right. And this is a way in which Mary Vance and Felicity King are a lot alike. Both are very industrious, very hard workers, very interested in propriety, though slightly differently. The
Mm-hmm.
interesting thing is that if Mary and Felicity were adults, their diligence and prowess in homemaking would give them the sort of authority they both seem to be seeking. But because they're young girls, they're also expected to be passive, demure, and sweet, and neither of them are. And Mary Vance, certainly unlikable, just ask poor little Rilla Blythe. But while she acts with a kind of bossy authority, she's not sensitive like Felicity. When she's corrected on her own behavior, for instance, about lying, she's generally good natured in taking that feedback. Mary has more of an imagination than Felicity. She's certainly more interesting. She does captivate the group by the strength of her personality, even if her bossiness sometimes overtakes the camaraderie. She's the one delivering harsh truth to the Meredith kids, which sometimes leads to more disasters, but it's also the kind of straight talk that they seem to need. Nobody else is doing it.
Nope.
I would imagine that Mary Vance and Felicity would not especially like each other. While they are both excellent housekeepers, they would thus compete over who is better at it.
Mm-hmm.
Felicity would likely be horrified by Mary's bluntness, not to mention Mary's origins as an orphan of two alcoholics raised as a homegirl. And while Mary has plenty of opinions on the correctness of behaviors in the community, she's much more concerned with the possible consequences for the Merediths rather than propriety for propriety's sake, the way that Felicity is. Felicity is very much all about what does the etiquette column say, and that's what you should
Mm-hmm.
do, versus what might actually happen if you break the rules of etiquette. Mary is deeply loyal and caring to the Merediths, even if she's tough and blunt about it. She is generally coming from a caring place, whereas Felicity, even though she does love her family, is definitely not coming from that same place. Felicity is concerned with feeling superior. Felicity's insecurity is leaking out between her snarks. And Mary is nothing if not authentic, and she's definitely secure in herself. So they're an interesting contrast.
Yeah, they really are an interesting contrast. I think when we set out to do this episode, I was really thinking about them as like two halves of the same coin, but they're quite different characters. But I do think that they are coming from a place of insecurity, both of them. Mary's, I think, is much more warranted than Felicity's, right? Like, Felicity, of course, is frustrated that her playmates don't respect her power and authority, but the root of Mary's insecurity is existential, right? She's an orphan. She's truly very worried about survival.
You're right. I think I'm using the word insecurity, I'm thinking of it as being secure in your own sense of self.
Hmm.
Whereas for Mary, it's her circumstances that are insecure, right? She has to prove her worth through her work. She has to worry about being accepted into a community and a home in a way that is not at all true for Felicity. Felicity is insecure in herself. She seems to feel like if she's not in charge or being treated as an authority, she might not be visible at all. So they're different kinds of insecure, right? Mary's comes from that very real place of being an orphan and being raised to feel like her only value comes in how hard she works. She knows that her safety in a home is not unconditional. She's
Mhm.
very aware of the real world consequences for being perceived as bad. Felicity's type of insecurity strikes me as that kind of seeking approval and acceptance that has gotten kind of crossed with an early dose of superiority and twisted in this way. I feel like I see Felicity more in like some of the middle school girls I know who aren't sure who they are if they aren't the center of attention.
Oof, yeah.
What makes Mary tougher to like, besides the codfish incident, is the effect she accidentally has on the Merediths, instilling that fear of stepmothers, for example, making them very self conscious about their house and their father, reporting back gossip that hurts them. But she's not deliberately trying to cause pain. In fact, the opposite. Her personality is one of those take me or leave me types, but she's nothing if not authentic.
Right. Yeah. Felicity is like calculated with her barbs and does seem to be trying to cause distress sometimes. Mary causes distress often by accident, but she's just sort of reporting the facts or as she understands them, right? And here's a good example of exactly that. So after she's taken in by Miss Cornelia, Mary's overbearing expertise expands from housework and picking gum and wicked stepmothers to town gossip and matters of propriety, which makes a lot of sense because now she's spending a lot of time with Miss Cornelia.
She is hearing plenty of opinions.
In a way, Miss Cornelia is kind of like the worst person to take Mary in. I mean, she's the best person. I love her, but Mary.
There, she's going to feed that. Whereas, let's say somebody like Anne, who's much less inclined to gossip about what's going on in the community and pass judgment on other people, might
Right.
not enhance that part of Mary, let's say.
Yeah, this is like the gossip pipeline from Miss Cornelia to Mary Vance proves to be like very toxic, but at any rate. So after the incident where Faith goes to church without stockings, Mary issues a very bossy correction to her friend. Quote, Mary Vance was there and, as usual, in a lecturing mood. She gave Faith to understand that she had disgraced herself and her father beyond redemption, and that she, Mary Vance, was done with her. Everybody was talking and everybody said the same thing. I simply feel that I can't associate with you any longer, she concluded. We are going to associate with her then, cried Nan Blythe. Nan secretly thought Faith had done an awful thing, but she wasn't going to let Mary Vance run matters in this high-handed fashion. And if you are not, you needn't come any more to Rainbow Valley, Miss Vance. Nan and I both put their arms around Faith and glared defiance at Mary. The latter suddenly crumpled up, sat down on a stump, and began to cry. It ain't that I don't want to, she wailed, but if I keep in with Faith, people will be saying that I put her up to doing things. Some are saying it now, true's you live. I can't afford to have such things said of me, now that I'm in a respectable place and trying to be a lady. So I can really understand Mary here, right? This is Maud doing what she does so beautifully. We can completely understand why Mary is so hung up on propriety because her future depends on it. And she's had a difficult enough past that she knows what it is she stands to lose. The Blythe girls, who are socially superior, can withstand an association with Faith's scandal that Mary, as an orphan, simply can't.
And the Blythe girls are not just in a socially secure position, but in a practical sense, right? No matter what kind of shenanigans they get up to, they know their parents love them, will protect them, and they will always have a home. They'll always have food. Mary doesn't have that luxury. She's only been at Miss Cornelia's for a few months at this point, and she doesn't want Miss Cornelia to change her mind. Heck, she's not even officially adopted. I mean, you can just get a kid from
Yeah,
the home, as we've established. Miss Cornelia could send her back at any moment. I don't know if there's any official paperwork happening here.
right. You just pass her along this to the next person.
Right.
I mean, we know that Cornelia and Marshall never would. They love
Right.
Mary, but Mary doesn't know that.
But Mary doesn't know that. She's spent her whole life being passed from family to family, right? She ran away for exactly this reason. The person she had been living with and working with was planning on just giving her to her cousin.
Wild.
Right. But of course, the way that Mary conveys her anxiety here is with this air of bossy superiority that rubs all the girls the wrong way. It's really a perfect example of why Maud's unlikable girls are so fascinating. Here's this domineering, unladylike little girl lecturing her friends about manners when they're actually of a more elevated social class. That can be very galling. But what would you differently if you were Mary and you learned that the key to your safety was to work hard, be useful, and not get in trouble within the boundaries of propriety? For
Mm,
Mary, she doesn't have any social capital to withstand scandal. For the Meredith girls, it's embarrassing. For the Blythe girls, it's a blip. But for Mary, it's easy to see why this would be so threatening to her.
yeah.
So Mary's unlikability is multifaceted. She's domineering, a bit rough and tumble in her manners, showy know-it-all, whose authoritative manner of speaking unduly influences the Meredith kids. And if the Meredith kids had stable, loving parents in their lives, Mary would not have such an effect on them. They would have somebody to go and ask.
What is this girl talking about? Is this true?
Right. Exactly. Mary is far from that ideal sweet and submissive Victorian girl, but she's also got her social class and unknown parentage working against her. It seems like some of her social transgressions would not seem so outrageous if she was in the same social class as her playmates.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And that's one of the big differences, right, between Mary and Felicity. Felicity can afford to be unpleasant. Nothing bad is going to happen to her,
Yeah.
right? What's going to happen? The other kids tease her back?
Yeah, she's still going to be the beloved daughter in a big, large, loving family. She's still always going to have this deep social, familial connection to Carlisle. Like, she's not in an existential crisis the way that Mary is.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this issue of class is an interesting one. And it comes up again in another one of Maud's unlikable girls. So now I'm going to take us to Anne of Ingleside and talk about Jenny Penny. So just to reorient the listeners, Jenny is a classmate of young Di Blythe, and Di becomes absolutely enchanted with Jenny's wild proclamations about her very special and important family. And Jenny is just one of these kids who has a way of talking that makes her life seem extraordinarily special and interesting, and Di falls for every one of Jenny's little exaggerations. Quote, evidently the Pennies were no common people. Jenny's Aunt Lena, it appeared, possessed a wonderful gold and garnet necklace, which had been given to her by an uncle who was a millionaire. One of her cousins had a diamond ring that cost $1,000, and another cousin had won a prize in elocution over 1,700 competitors. She had an aunt who was a missionary and worked among the leopards in India.
I love that, especially because I think Anne tries to correct Di to, does she mean leapers? And she's like, nope, leopards. She said leopards.
Said leopards.
She's definitely working with the leopards in India.
So, but while young Di is sure that Jenny is precisely who she says she is, Anne does have her doubts and reservations. She asks Susan who this Penny family is, and Susan reports that the family is new to Four Winds, and rumor has it that their house is unkempt, and the out-of-work patriarch lets the children do whatever they like. Anne decides that she wouldn't want Di mixed up with a family like that, and she hopes that Di will soon get over this fascination with Jenny.
There's definitely the implication here that if Jenny were from a more established or respectable family, or a family of a higher social class, Anne and Susan might be more open to Di's friendship with her. Or perhaps the implication is that if Jenny were from a better family, she wouldn't make up these outlandish tales in the first place, which, look, child liars come in all social classes. But either way, much like Mary Vance, Jenny Penny's unlikability is directly tied to her family's position in the community. Di does not understand these social nuances yet, though she is young and guileless enough to believe all of Jenny's overblown boasts. She follows Jenny home from school one day, conveniently a day when she knows no one from Ingleside will be able to come get her and make her go home, to see Jenny's wonderful life for herself. And of course, when she gets to the Penny's ramshackle home, Di has the unpleasant awakening that Jenny's home life is hardly the glamorous scene that she was led to believe. Maud explains that Di, quote, was beginning to feel very much out of place, and the glamour with which Jenny had been invested in her eyes was suddenly and irrevocably gone. She did not feel the old thrill when Jenny told her about the time she had been almost drowned falling in a mill pond. She did not believe it. Jenny just imagined those things. Ugh, it's so hard when your bubble bursts.
The veil has been lifted from her eyes.
Jenny's unlikability really comes down to this matter of her tall tales. She's not a child who is particularly well acquainted with the virtue of honesty, not good friends with the truth.
Nope.
And she seems to enjoy telling a grand story to make herself feel more interesting and special. She also bullies Di quite a bit, implying that Di is overprotected at Ingleside, is unable to make her own decisions about friendships. Jenny is a master of the neg.
She is a master of the neg. Oh gosh. But interestingly, Jenny herself seems to be unaware of the discrepancy between how she described her life and how someone like Di would perceive it. So Jenny also isn't exactly wrong that Di has in fact lived a very sheltered and protected life. And so this is where I really think that class difference becomes the main factor in Jenny's unlikability. Absolutely, she is a boastful little girl who is prone to hyperbole, and she is very careless with Di, and she does hurt her feelings. But I also tend to think that if Di were from a less privileged place, she probably would have enough life experience to not take Jenny quite as seriously as she does. I imagine that a kid closer to Jenny's class would probably feel better equipped to laugh off some of Jenny's wilder flights of fancy, knowing full well that her house was no mansion, no matter how well she told the story. But for little Di, who does in fact live in a very large and elegant house, having a friend who lives in a mansion is not outside the realm of possibility for her. So she doesn't even think to distrust Jenny, and she's all the more shocked when she sees the extent of Jenny's falsehoods. One of the ways that Maud conveys Jenny's class on the page is in her manner of speaking. As we've talked about before, Maud is a master of voice, and the way her characters speak tells you a lot about them. And so in Jenny's case, she speaks really slangily, which tells the reader that she is from a different class, and that she hasn't had the same access to education that Di has had. And in fact, the nail in the coffin of Di and Jenny's friendship comes down to a matter of elocution. Di corrects Jenny's grammar. Jenny said, "I'd have fell," and Di corrects her to, "I'd have fallen." And Maud tells us that from that moment on, everything was over between Di and Jenny.
It is true that correcting somebody else's grammar can be a death knell to a friendship.
Yeah, it can. Proceed with caution with that one. Grammar hounds. But this is a little bit of an aside, but this sort of slangy accent that Maud uses for some children in her books, like Jenny Penny and Mary Vance both have it, it also seems to indicate that those kids are neglected, or that no one is trying to raise them to like a high standard of behavior and thus not to a high standard of speech. But what I think is really interesting about this is that Anne didn't speak like that when she first came to Green Gables, despite the neglect that we know she suffered. And I don't think this was an oversight on Maud's part. I think this was a very deliberate choice to make Anne seem more sympathetic. And also, it's kind of the humor of Anne, right? Because she would make these very formal, grandiose, eloquent speeches as a very young girl, and that was all part of the kind of innate humor of young Anne. But when you think about it, there's really only two ways that Anne would have been such an erudite 11-year-old orphan. One, and this is probably the most obvious one, she's an intelligent kid and she's a reader and she taught herself how to speak like the most educated classes did. But also, and maybe a little less evident to a modern reader, is that this was the Victorian era, when a person's nature was thought to be tied to their parentage, and we know that Anne's father was an educator. So I think another reason that Anne was so well spoken as a young girl, even a very neglected young girl, stemmed from this Victorian notion that her social class was just going to shine through, despite her neglectful experiences in her earliest years.
Oh, that is an interesting thought, because while Anne is an orphan, and that is obviously a plot point, her class doesn't show up very much at all. Aside from Mrs. Rachel Lynde's initial first fears of an orphan poisoning the well, once Anne is ensconced in Green Gables, nobody ever brings it up. Nobody is implying that Anne is less than because she was raised in an orphanage or she was a home girl in any way. But it is interesting when we've got Mary Vance and Jenny Penny in contrast.
Yes, Mary's status as an orphan and someone who doesn't have a clearly understood past is underscored by her manner of speaking in a way that Anne's was not.
Anne's parents tragically died young, but if they had lived, Anne would have been the daughter of a teacher, and they might not have been wealthy, but she would have been educated, all
Yep.
of those types of things. She would have been loved and brought up with,
Respectively.
yes, brought up respectably. Whereas Mary's parents, she says both of them were basically alcoholics and died as a result of alcoholism and or suicide. If Mary's folks had lived, her life would still be tragic.
Yeah, very much so. And she still wouldn't have access to a lot of the education and sort of social opportunities that she ends up having later on once she's taken in by Miss Cornelia. Returning to Jenny Penny, however, a child who was being raised by totally indifferent adults, if there ever was one, Di manages to make it out of the ill-fated sleepover by faking her own death, which is, of course, a very reasonable way to leave an uncomfortable situation.
It's usually what I do. One of the other unlikable girls of Anne of Ingleside is Delilah Green, another playfellow of Di's. Di has terrible taste in friends.
She really does.
She repeatedly falls into the webs of interesting, mean girls. You can see that Di wants some adventure and romance in her world, and she is absolutely willing to hitch her wagon to some dubious stars to find it. Delilah Green, unlike Jenny Penny, is from a good family. Anne and Susan assure themselves of this right away after the Jenny Penny incident. But she also has a predilection for dramatics and deception. She tells Di that she is persecuted by her stepmother, hardly giving anything to eat, forced to work like a terrible little Cinderella. Delilah confides in Di that hers is a life of sorrow. Young Anne totally relates.
Yep.
And Di is completely enchanted by the romance of that notion. Also, clearly Anne's child.
Yep.
Anne agrees that Delilah, of course, may come to Ingleside, saying, quote, she is a pretty ladylike little thing, though of course she must exaggerate. Perhaps her stepmother is a little hard on her, and I've heard her father is rather dour and strict. She probably has some grievances and likes to dramatize them by way of getting a little sympathy. So this is an interesting way to consider Delilah as an unlikable girl. She doesn't have some of those Victorian values of girlhood. She's very pretty. She has ladylike little manners, and that grants her access to Ingleside. It's what Delilah does with that access that cements her unlikability. Di is so excited to have Delilah come over. When Delilah comes over, they have a wonderful time. She's well-mannered and helpful. She offers to help set the table and pick flowers for a bouquet for the table. She offers to help polish the silver after the meal, tells Di that she ate well and enjoyed the meal. The girls play with Di's doll and they eat candy and they have a wonderful day together, ending the day curled up in the spare room bed. But the next day, the other shoe drops when Delilah tells all the other children at school how terrible life at Ingleside is, how Susan is somehow both a wasteful cook and also stingy. She's not necessarily the most clever little liar. How they forced her to weed the garden and polish the silver. How Di refused to allow Delilah to sleep in the spare room bed. Di overhears this recitation of bald-faced lies, calls Delilah out, and runs home to tell Anne and Susan of her betrayal.
Ah, poor Di. So Delilah's unlikability, like Jenny Penny's, really stems from these tall tales and the way she tries to make herself seem more interesting by casting herself as the tragic heroine of every story. It's almost like the inverse of Jenny, who made her life seem much more grand than it was. Delilah's stories make her life appear much harder than it is.
Those with curly hair want straight hair. Those with straight hair want curly hair. It's the inverse, but also the same because both sets of tall tales center the teller as the most interesting person around with the most extraordinary circumstance. No matter what nice thing you might have or experience, Jenny will have one twice as large or twice as exciting.
Yep.
And no matter what little trouble you might have in your life, Delilah is sure to have it 3 times as worse. They're both one-uppers, just in opposite directions.
Ugh, yes. And I think Anne might have the right idea here with Delilah, right? Perhaps she is having some trouble at home adjusting to her stepmother. Maybe she does sort of envision herself as like a little Cinderella and hopes to elicit some sympathy by exaggerating her grievances. But Reagan, I have to wonder what got into her when she thought she could get away with telling lies about her night at Ingleside when the whole school is full of Ingleside children who could refute the stories.
Honestly, kids are not the best liars for exactly that reason. Like, these aren't good lies because they're not believable.
No, she did not think any of that through.
As we move on to talking a little bit about Windy Poplars, there Anne encounters two other unlikable girls, both of whom Anne and the reader end up liking quite a bit. So these are a little bit different than our Delilahs and our Jenny Pennies. There's a couple of things happening in the stories of Jen Pringle and Catherine Brooke. First, Maud is returning to a trope that has served her well over several books. Delightful Anne wins over a challenging person, whether that's Mrs. Rachel Lynde, Aunt Josephine, Mr. Harrison, or Leslie Moore. Anne's books are full of situations where her authentic charm and heartfelt kindness connects her to people who are standoffish, intimidating, or otherwise daunting. And so that's definitely present in Windy Poplars as well. Anne befriends all manners of cranks around the town. But these two girls are a little different in that they're both young women who defy Victorian values and behavior expectations, and Anne's friendship with them doesn't really change that part of them. Rather, we just understand them better as Anne gets to know them. They become more likable not because they start to adhere to conventional manners and deportment. Catherine will always be reserved, Jen will always be clannish. It's who they are, but because we get to know them. And this is the magic of Maud's Unlikable Girls. She can write about these girls and young women who defy convention, who we don't like and aren't supposed to like, and then she can slowly peel back the layers of the onion until we understand them and do start to like them. And in doing so, she's carving a path for her readers to be a bit more themselves, showing them that there's gradations of girlhood. They don't have to be perfect. There's room to be themselves, even the darker, less palatable parts of themselves.
So let's look at Jen Pringle first, who I think of as like the Regina George of Summerside. I love Principal Anne's first description of her new student. Quote, I believe she is deliberately organizing a subtle campaign of insubordination and disrespect, with which I am going to find it hard to cope. She has a knack for making irresistibly comic faces, and when I hear a smothered ripple of laughter running over the room behind my back, I know perfectly well what has caused it. But so far, I haven't been able to catch her out in it. She has brains too, the little wretch, can write compositions that are fourth cousins to literature, and is quite brilliant in mathematics. Woe is me. There is a certain sparkle in everything she says or does, and she has a sense of humorous situations which would be a bond of kinship between us, if she hadn't started out by hating me. As it is, I fear it will be a long time before Jen and I can laugh together over anything. So right away, Anne sees that there may be something of a kindred spirit in Jen. She's sparkly and funny, but that Jen's sense of family pride won't let Anne succeed, and Jen is using her charisma and popularity to sabotage Anne's principalship. So recall that a Pringle cousin had also applied for Anne's job and lost it to Anne, and now this powerful family has decided to wage a cold war against Anne. Jen, emboldened by her family, is the campaign leader at school. Jen draws cruel caricatures of Anne, and she deliberately causes disruptions in class. She won't do her homework, and when she's called in for detention, she has her wealthy and powerful great aunts come to get her. When Jen is cast as Mary Queen of Scots in the high school play, she calls in sick before the show is to go on, hoping to tank the production and make Anne look foolish. And when Anne stands up for herself against Jen's insults, the Pringles in town call for Anne's resignation. It's not until Anne makes peace with the Pringle matriarchs that Jen ends her reign of terror. Told to apologize and behave herself from now on, she does so, and the other students follow her lead. And then it's not long before Jen and Anne are walking home from school together, nurturing the friendship that Anne suspected was possible all along.
Jen's unlikability is circumstantial. It's not essential to who she is as a person. She's a clever and interesting girl, and when encouraged to make things difficult for the new principal, she did almost too good a job of it, right? She embodies some of those Victorian values that make her popular. She's charming and pretty, but she's almost too clever and lively to truly be a proper girl of her time. Maybe this was a great outlet for mischief for Jen to have an easy target like Anne, an easy and approved target in Anne.
Mm-hmm.
And crucially, Jen in the Windy Poplars book is mostly only interested in being mean to and causing problems for Anne in service of her family's pride. There's no indication that she's mean to her peers. Although the Jen in the CBC adaptation of Anne of Avonlea is very much a classic mean girl, being quite cruel and bullying to the non-Pringle students at school. There's none of that actually in the book. Notably, in this list of unlikable girls, Jen is the only one who is directing it at an authority figure rather than her peers.
Well, they're all her cousins.
They're all her cousins.
Yeah.
Catherine Brooke, on the other hand, she carries some of that unlikability to her core. She's actively cultivating her unlikability. And it's one of the reasons she's a much tougher nut to crack in Anne of Windy Poplars. Anne solves the Pringle issue in the first third of the book, but befriending Catherine will take Anne much, much longer.
So Catherine Brooke, the vice principal at Anne's school, is acerbic, negative, and unapproachable. She dresses dowdily, lives in a drab boarding house, and is friends with no one, nor does she seem to want to be. She antagonizes Anne for seemingly no reason. When Anne with an E tells Catherine that she likes that her name is spelled with a K rather than a C, Catherine signs the next note Catherine with a C. Like, for no reason at all, just to be unpleasant.
Yeah, that's a very clear shot across the bow.
Yeah, right? I really think that Catherine is our ultimate unlikable girl. The other girls that we've talked about today, well, they're a good bit younger, and we see that they're trying. They're figuring things out, they're trying to find their place in their communities, and there's some friction, and there's misunderstandings, and there's hurt feelings along the way. And that's not unlike what most of us go through as we grow up. We learn how to get it right by getting it wrong a lot of the time. But Catherine, uniquely, is going out of her way not to be liked. Not only is she defying Victorian behavioral standards for a young woman, she's terse and growly, a quote martinet in the classroom, and she substitutes sarcasm for humor. She's not even trying to be sociable. She's not trying to put herself into social situations where she might find friends. She's not trying to be pretty or charming or appealing or even kind. Intuitive Anne suspects that there is loneliness and loss beneath this brusque exterior, but even she is loath to try to befriend someone who is going out of her way to make Anne's life difficult. Throughout Anne's first year at Summerside, she just sort of grins and bears Catherine, right? Unlike Jen, Catherine is not disruptive. She's just unfriendly and mean to Anne. Anne's annoyed, but also she has spent so much time fighting the Pringles this year that when it comes to Catherine, I think she's just like, well, okay, I guess I can handle this. Anne, as it turns out, cannot handle not figuring out what makes Catherine tick. Anne invites Catherine home to Green Gables for Christmas, fully aware that she may be dooming everyone to a miserable holiday.
And that scene where Anne asks Catherine to come home, it's a little bit unique in the Anne books in that we get a tiny glimpse into Catherine's point of view. Maud doesn't often play around with point of view, but here she does slightly. And the brief glimpse we get into Catherine instantly tells the reader that Anne is right. There is a wounded girl inside of Catherine who's lonely and in desperate need of friendship. Quote, "Oh, Miss Brooke, look at that sunset," said Anne rapturously from the squeaky, cushionless rocker to which Catherine had ungraciously pointed her. "I've seen a good many sunsets," said the latter coldly without moving. "Condescending to me with your sunsets," she thought bitterly. Now, readers know that Anne is being utterly genuine in her rapture over a sunset, but Catherine doesn't. And what's more, we see that Catherine's room is grim, dark, unpleasant, and that Anne, in pointing out the lovely sunset just outside the room, offends Catherine. Catherine may not be likable, but she's not foolish, and she knows that Anne doesn't want to be in that ugly room with a person who's never even been civil to her, and she resents cheerful Anne's habit of finding something lovely in every circumstance. To Catherine, it rings false and inauthentic and condescending, because that's what it would be if she did it. Anne makes more headway with Catherine when she finally drops the politeness entirely and honestly tells Catherine that she doesn't make Anne feel very welcome. And Catherine says Anne is not welcome. Who would be welcome in this room? And Anne again speaks honestly. She agrees that the room is not a nice one. She doesn't try and find something pleasant in it. She doesn't understand why Catherine would live there if she didn't like it. Catherine won't explain, sure that Anne could not understand, and demands that Anne state her business. Anne invites Catherine to Green Gables for Christmas, and Catherine is sure Anne is playing some sort of cruel joke on her. Anne insists that she is sincere, and Catherine responds sarcastically that she is not a charity case yet. Anne once more says the quiet part out loud. "Catherine Brooke, whether you know it or not, what you want is a good spanking." And this rare flash of negativity from Anne, Anne's moment of unlikability, we could say, is actually what wins Catherine over, what assures Catherine of Anne's humanity. And Catherine agrees to come to Green Gables.
Anne kind of has to speak to Catherine in her own language in order for Catherine to start to trust and believe her.
Yep.
The ice begins to thaw between Anne and Catherine as Catherine goes to Green Gables for Christmas. The two of them connect there, and over a winter wonderland snowshoe ramble, they're able to share their secrets. Anne tells Catherine of her lonely early childhood, and Catherine finally tells Anne about her difficult upbringing, how she never felt wanted, and never felt like she could be deserving of friendship. Catherine's unlikability was her armor, her defense against a world that had made it all too clear that she was not wanted and not loved. Anne, in similar circumstances, retreated into her imagination imagination. Both girls leaned into ambition, working hard to be able to support themselves. But while Anne has allowed herself friendship and love, Catherine has not. Not until Anne shows her how. Catherine is an unlikable girl, sure, but she didn't know that she could ever be anything different.
Catherine Brooks' arc in Windy Poplars is one of my favorite things. I know Windy Poplars as a book is not anybody's favorite, but Catherine Brooks chapters are so worth it.
They are, yeah. Their and Catherine's friendship is really, really splendid. So the last thought I have for our unlikable girls is that because they're breaking the mold and stepping outside the standard of a typical Victorian girlhood or young womanhood, that is actually going to give them so much practice for living a life that they want on their own terms as adults. We were talking about this a little bit, but you know what's going to happen to Felicity when she grows up. She's going to marry this boy who absolutely adores her, and she's going to become a community leader as a minister's wife. That is a wonderful life for Felicity, for this girl who longs to be in charge and who has domestic skills that rival Martha Stewart's. We see that Mary Vance will turn into the staunchest, most patriotic war bride. She puts on overalls to go help bring in the harvest while the boys are off at war, and she declares loudly that she couldn't be prouder of her fiance for losing a leg in the war, right? That so neatly coincides with the sort of iconoclastic little girl that she is. And then Catherine Brooke, right? She becomes a secretary to a globe-trotting MP, and she lives this exciting life of travel and politics. And that wouldn't have been available to her if she hadn't had the courage to chart her own path. So I think these unlikable girls are all going to turn out okay.
Yes, I think so. And I hope the girls that we didn't hear what happens to them as they grow up, some of our antagonists, I hope they also get a chance to use some of those things that are maybe not serving them well as children, but find ways to serve them well as adults.
I mean, I think that both Jenny Penny and Delilah Green will find, wonderful careers as fiction writers.
At the very least. Well, so normally we like to do a Birch Path, but we've had quite a long episode because we've pulled girls from all of these different books to talk about. And we did a lot of talking about Victorian girlhood ideals as we did so in our story club. So I don't think we'll really do a separate Birch Path today. Let's just move straight to our Inspired by Anne instead. Kelly, what you got?
Today, I am inspired by another one of literature's classic unlikable girls, Emma Woodhouse. Now, this is actually a podcast recommendation. If you are enjoying Kindred Spirits Book Club, and we sincerely hope that you are also going to love a podcast called Novel Pairings. It's also two women who are friends like Reagan and I, and they also discuss classic literature. We're in the final season of Novel Pairings. They're winding it down. And what they decided to do for their last season to really go out with a bang is they're discussing both of their favorite novel, which is Jane Austen's Emma. They're going really slowly, like taking a couple chapters at a time, and they're really savoring this wonderful book. They have been pulling out all these really incredible gems, like these little moments of humor, these little clues about social conventions from that time that like modern readers wouldn't necessarily be aware of. Emma is one of my favorite Jane Austen novels. I've read it several times, and even still, I'm learning so much from listening to their podcast about it. They are giving me a totally fresh perspective on this book and a totally fresh perspective on Emma, who is a heroine who has been challenging readers for 2 centuries. She is such a dazzling character. As a reader, you can't help but be charmed by her. You can't help but love her, even as you were like ready to wring her neck from all of the frustration she causes with her meddling. So yes, if you want to spend some more time at Highbury with Emma Woodhouse, I will recommend the podcast Novel Pairings.
I love that recommendation. And I'm going to bounce right off that and say, while we were in London, we had a chance to see Clueless the musical.
Ah,
It was a delight. If you are not aware, the classic 90s movie Clueless is a modern adaptation of Emma. And the movie is not only a fun time capsule of the 90s, starring the delightful Alicia Silverstone and an early Brittany Murphy, it holds up really well. And the new musical is very fun and vibrant. They keep it very close to the movie material with some fun stagecraft and ensemble numbers and a very sparkly heroine. You cringe, because you can see the way that Cher is overstepping in her meddling, but you also believe in her ability to become better than that, to use that for good instead of for meddling. The actress who played Cher was spectacular. She absolutely deserves to carry the show. She was great. It was funny. We were watching it, and my husband was not aware that Clueless was an adaptation of Emma. And at intermission, he said, "Are we supposed to like Cher? Like, why is she being like this?" Like, he didn't realize. He's like, "What is going on with her? Are we supposed to like that she's doing all this?" And we're like, "No, that's the point.
No,
That's the whole point."
you're not supposed to like her. And you're supposed to kind of hate the fact that you do like her, even though you don't like her, right?
Right.
That's what makes her such a fun character.
Right. She's crossing all of these boundaries. She's
Yep.
meddling all over the place. She's totally not self-aware, but she's also so fun.
Yes.
And you want better for her, which is why her arc is so great. So it was fantastic. We really enjoyed it. If you find yourself in London, I recommend checking it out, or going back and seeing Clueless the movie if you want a little 90s flashback.
That's a great recommendation.
Anyway, Kindred Spirits, please join us in 2 weeks for another episode of Kindred Spirits Book Club. We will be joined by a very special guest, the illustrator Brianna Core Scott, who is telling us all about her work illustrating a new children's book based on Anne of Green Gables. Please be sure to subscribe to Kindred Spirits Book Club wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. And don't forget, you can still get a free Kindred Spirits Book Club sticker by leaving us a review or sharing about us on social media. Just email us at kindredspirits.bookclub@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram to tell us that you did that. Thanks for listening, Kindred Spirits.
Thanks, Kindred Spirits.